reading this week?
Sí, Señor.
Sí, señor. Listos a la reading. Reading. What is reading?
Leer.
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 Pero yo leo. ¿Correcto? Leo. We leando. Leando. We are ready. Here we go. I'm going to need to bone up on that a little bit because I think I'm going to Guatemala in a couple months.
Todas sus lecciones es muy geniales.
Gracias. Gracias. All right, well, let's begin with prayer. We bless you, Yehovah, creator and ruler and the one that loves us, Father. And we ask that you open your word to us tonight that we may learn and we may follow. Amen. Now, this is an old story that a lot of us learned when we were growing up in VBS or something like that, where we learned about Balaam and his talking donkey. And we always thought that was the most amazing thing ever. That was more amazing than Jonah and the whale, which is not whale, but we didn't know that. We were just learning. We were using those flannel graphs. You guys ever use those? One of the reasons I'll be going to Guatemala is delivering flannel graphs, because they're using those, because they don't do all the high technology like we do up in the mountains down there, but they love flannel graphs. They love them. And the other reason I will go is lead a pastor's conference in Freedom Night, basically a Wellspring conference. So I'm getting excited about that. Anyway, this is about Balaam and Balak. Okay? His name in English looks like Balak, but it's Balak. Okay? And he was king of Moab. All right? And he had noticed that Israel was in the land, and he had heard from all of the nations around him that knew him, you got to watch out for Israel. Their Elohim is bad, and he will wipe you out. And the bottom line is that Balak was worried. We read at the beginning of our reading, when Balak, son of Zippor, realized all that Bani Israel had done to the Amorites, Moab became in great dread because there were so many people. Well, how many were there? How many, do you remember at the beginning of the book of Numbers, how many fighting men there were in Israel? 600,000-ish. Okay, that's a mighty army. All right, and that's maybe not including any of the mixed multitude that had not yet joined up in one of the tribal units. Although I think they really had to do that. In order to get in and be one of Israel, they had to join up with one of the tribes that were there. So Moab was filled with dread because of Bani Israel. In other words, they were worried. And they were really worried that something was going to happen. All right? Balak had an idea. He devised a plan. And he got his messengers and he sent them to a man named, we know his name as Balaam, but in Hebrew it's Balaam. Okay, and the guy's name was Balaam, and we all know about the donkey, but we're going to learn a lot more tonight if you didn't already know that. Okay, why did he want this man named Balaam? Because he heard that Balaam had a way with words, that if he pronounced a word that was a blessing, then it happened. But if he gave a curse, then that happened. So he thought, well, I'll get this Balaam guy, and I'll bring him over, and I'll have him look at Israel and pronounce a curse, and I'll give him money to do it. And then maybe we won't have to worry about Israel anymore. Okay, in Jewish tradition, we learned that Balak knew Balaam from his hometown of Pithor, and he knew his powers firsthand because it was Balaam that had prophesied that Balak would be made king of Moab. Furthermore, in the Midrash, we learn that Balaam was so great of a prophet that his words equaled those of Moses. Okay, but it's like, and we learned about this back in Noah, when we studied Noah, the second reading of the year, that there's darkness and there's light, and there's good and there's evil, and there's this, it's not a balance. Balance is not the right word, but everything that exists in the good has a negative. Okay? And the idea in the Midrash is that the negative counterpart of Moses was Balaam. So he's not in the Bible that much. He's not mentioned that much, but apparently this Balaam was a rather formidable guy in his words and his abilities. Okay? So we read a little bit later here, verse 5, that he sent messengers to summon Balaam, son of Beor, at Pethor, near the river, in his native land, saying to him, "Look now, a people has come out of Egypt. See now, they cover the surface of the earth and are settling beside me." In other words, they're like ants. They're everywhere on the land. I look down and they're everywhere. They're that numerous. So then he asks him, "Come now, curse this people for me, because they are too strong for me. Perhaps I may be able to defeat them and drive them away from the country. I know that whoever you bless will be blessed, and whoever you curse will be cursed." Okay? So that means that Balak trusted in Balaam. Okay? He had faith in Balaam. And who was this guy, really? Who was Balaam? Who was he? Well, in the next verse, we learn that the elders of Moab and Midian, the ones that went to meet him, they left with the divination fees in their hand. When they came to Balaam, they told him Balak's words. Divination in Hebrew is the word kesem, and it means witchcraft or divination or sometimes sorcery. So the idea is it's magic, okay? And this was in Israel, this was a no-no. This was absolutely verboten in Israel, forbidden. Okay, you weren't allowed to do this, and if anybody was among you that did it, it wasn't good. You read in Deuteronomy 18, verse 10, "There must not be found among you anyone who makes his son or daughter pass through the fire." What does that mean? What was that practice? What was that, Larry? Yeah, sacrifice. Okay, now, there were ways that they went through fire and they didn't die. Okay? But often what it means is they literally allowed their children to be burned up in order to appease their God, whoever their God was on that day. Because there were many. Okay, so you're not allowed, there's not going to be among you, there's not to be found among you anyone who does that, or, what else? A fortune teller, or a soothsayer, an omen reader, or sorcerer, or one who casts spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. So whenever you're at the fair, and you're walking by all these booths, right, just remember, no. Okay, we're not going to do that. That's a no-no. All right, and you know what? It's easy, and I believe in our modern day there are a lot of even believers in Jesus who they're like, oh, you don't need to worry about that. That they believe that it isn't real. Okay? Just like a lot of them believe that there are no other gods other than Yehovah. But there are. If you believe the Bible, there are other gods. Okay? He is God of gods, meaning he's the highest one, but there are other beings that are, we would use the word divine, and they have areas, okay, that they're over. One of them is up in the northern area of Israel into Syria. There's a mountain there. We're going to learn about this in Matthew, Mount Hermon. Okay, on that mountain is believed to be the mountain of a god that isn't our God. And that happens to be the mountain that Yeshua went up with his 3 other disciples and was glowing. Remember that? Okay? So there was something else going on there other than the disciples going, wow, that's awesome. There was something about that had to do with a battle in the heavens. So we'll learn about that later. Okay, anyway, so you have these other gods, and you're not to have any of this among Israel. For whoever does these things is an abomination to Adonai. And because of these abominations, Adonai, your God, is driving them out from before you. Well, that's amazing. They don't have Torah, right? I mean, these other nations, they don't have the laws of God. They don't have Torah, all right? And yet, Yehovah is driving them out of the land because of all these abominations. Why? Why would he do that? I mean, there's people like that all over the world, and Yehovah just leaves them where they are. Because of the land. Because that land is holy. And you remember, he warned Israel over and over again, if you do this, and if you do this, and if you do this, the land is going to spit you out. All right? And that's what's going on here. The land is spitting them out. And it's written that God is driving them out from before you. Okay, Balak's messengers arrived, and they spoke to Balaam. But during the night, God spoke to Balaam and told him not to go. Do not go with these messengers, okay? And he let them know, hey, I can't go. I was visited by Yehovah. And he uses the language, Yehovah my God. My question is, which of your gods is Yehovah? Is he your number one God? Is he your second God? Is he one God among many? Because it's obvious that Balaam was not a monotheist, okay? He was a worshiper of other gods. But anyway, he let Balak know, I can't do it. So then, Balak says, well, we'll give him more money, and I will send out the big dogs in my administration, my right and my left, okay? And I'm going to send them, and you guys will be able to convince Balaam to go. Okay, so they asked, and Balaam answered them. This is the next scripture there in verse 18. Even if Balak gave me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot cross beyond the mouth of Yehovah my Elohim. Okay? To do anything small or great. But now you may spend the night here. You may spend the night here too. And then I may find out anything else Adonai might have to say to me. In other words, I'm going to go ask, because that's a lot of money you got right there. Okay? And, sure enough, God came to Balaam by night and said to him, since the men came to you to summon you, arise and go with them. However, only the word I tell you are you to do. So, all right, get up and go with them, but you better do exactly what I command you to do, which is not unusual in the scripture, right? Isn't that what happened with Moses on the mountain? He's like, they're going to make this, and they need to make it exactly the way that I am telling you that they are to make it, right? In building the tabernacle and the ark and all of that, okay? Now, Balaam's words are that I won't cross beyond the mouth of Yehovah my God. The word mouth in Hebrew is a letter. Okay? It's the letter Pei. And in the ancient language, it looks like a mouth. Okay? In the modern language, it looks like a P in reverse. All right? But it means mouth, but mouth means a lot. In Hebrew, it's related to the word devar, which is word or speak. It's related to a lot. I mean, Yehovah, how did he create the universe? Words. He opened his mouth. Okay? All right, so Yehovah has now instructed Balaam that you can arise and go with them, but only do what I tell you to do. So Balaam agrees. He says, all right, I'll go with you. And then we read this in verse 22. But the anger of God burned because he was going. What? The angel of Adonai stood in the road to oppose him. He was riding on his donkey, and 2 of his servants were with him. Okay, so that's a little bit odd, because in the beginning of reading this, it looks like Balaam is a good guy. Doesn't it? Doesn't it look almost like Torah is making him out to be a good guy? But we know, because we know the end of the story, that he was not a good guy. Okay, and he wasn't a Hebrew. Okay, but God gave him a word that he could go, and then he went, and then you read God was angry with him because he went. What is up with that? Okay, I believe that it's not that he was going, it's the agenda that he had as he was going, because God said you can go, but do only what I command you, and he was about to not do that. Okay? And you're going to read about that in a minute, so you'll know. So, who was this angel of God, angel of Elohim? We read about him over and over again, don't we? In Torah, being with Israel. Okay? And you read about him in the book of Joshua being with Israel. Remember and you read about him at the burning bush with Moses. So at the burning bush in Exodus, the language is God said this. But it was an angel of God. But it was God. So it's the human manifestation of Yehovah. And who do we know that as? Yeshua. Okay, so just think about that. We could use the words, and Yeshua had a sword. Now, wait a minute. That isn't the guy we read about in the Gospels. That isn't Jesus, meek and mild. This is a being that has a sword. But we read about Yeshua having a sword. Where? Revelation. Okay? So don't, think of him as the little meek, nice guy. Because we already know that from reading Matthew, that sometimes he was rather blunt. Anyway, this angel had a sword, and Balaam's donkey was able to see the angel. Balaam was not. And the donkey ran off into a field. Balaam beat the donkey for his apparent disobedience and got him back on the road. Any symbolic meanings in that? The donkey was off the road that his master wanted him to be on. So he went and got the donkey, and he beat it back till it got back on the road again. Balaam is on the road to do what his master doesn't want him to do. So he's about to get a beating, okay, in a way. So the angel showed up again as his donkey made their way through a narrow passageway with walls on the right and the left. Only the donkey was able to see the angel with the sword in his hand. And the donkey pressed Balaam's leg against the wall, which crushed his foot. So Balaam beat the donkey again. Stupid donkey. Except he didn't use the word donkey, because donkey is not a Hebrew word. What's the Hebrew word for donkey? Anybody know? What's the King James word for donkey? Yes, it is. Okay, so he began to beat it again. So then the angel showed up again, a third time, and again, only the donkey was able to see him, and the donkey just sat down. Okay, and Balaam was on it, and he refused, or she refused to go on, so Balaam beat the donkey again with a stick. Remember, Proverbs 12:10. Remember this, everybody. A righteous person cares for the life of his animal. Isn't that neat? Yet, even the compassion of the wicked is cruel. So a righteous person cares for their animals. And I believe that even means dogs. Because my dog and I went out on a walk today. I haven't always loved my dogs, but once they were my dogs, well, you gotta deal with it. Anyway, so what happened next is amazing and proves that God is able to speak through anyone. So whenever anybody gets all, God speaks through that person, I'm like, yeah, well, all right. God spoke through Balaam's donkey. So that doesn't really mean anything to me. All right? It says, then Adonai opened the donkey's mouth, and she said to Balaam, what have I done to you that you've beaten me these 3 times? Balaam, this is funny, Balaam said back to the donkey, because you made a fool of me. If I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now. Does anybody else see something really humorous in that? The donkey's speaking, and he's acting like it happened every day. You know, the donkey's like, why'd you beat me? Balaam's like, because you're being a jerk. You're not doing what I want you to do, right? And if I had a sword, I would kill you right now. The donkey said to Balaam, am I not your donkey, which you have ridden as always to this day? Have I ever been in the habit of doing this to you? No, Balaam answered. So now, what happens next is has happened more than once in the Bible. It says, then Adonai opened Balaam's eyes. Okay? And he saw the angel of Adonai standing in the road with his drawn sword in his hand. So he fell on his face. I bet he did. And the angel of Adonai said to him, why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? Because I came as an adversary. And here it is, I underlined it. Because your way before me is a reckless one. What you are about, in other words, what you're about to do is not going to work. You're being reckless. You're off the way. Okay? Now, where else in the Bible do you know about someone's eyes that were opened and they witnessed or they got a glimpse into the spiritual realm, the heavenly realm? Elijah and his servant. Remember? I believe Elijah had the ability to know what was going on, like always. Okay? So they were about to get mobbed by an army. And Elijah was like, his servant was like, boss, look around you. I mean, we're going to get wiped out. And Elijah was like, don't worry. His servant was like, boss, what's the matter with you? Okay? Don't you realize we're about to get wiped out? And finally, Elijah said, Yehovah, open his eyes. And when he opened his eyes, all around him, on the mountains all around him, there was an army. And they were on, was that the fiery army that was around him? And there were a lot more of them than there were the guys that were about to beat him up. It was the army of heaven. So that's one example. Can you think of any others? Somebody got to look into the heavenly realm? A modern day version of, yeah?
They had a single rabbi in the 6-day war in Israel.
A rabbi.
And the Syrian armored units surrendered to that lone rabbi because...
Hold on, I'm going to give you the mic. Mark, go. Eat the mic.
All right, I'll do my best here. There was a modern-day version of that in the 6-day war that Israel fought in modern times. I can't remember the year, it was 67 or something like that, where a Syrian armored division surrendered to a single rabbi. And, I mean, they waved the white flag, they had their tanks, the turrets turned the opposite way, and this lone rabbi is leading them right to the IDF because they saw the heavenly realm.
Wow.
They saw all the warrior angels, and they knew that they couldn't stand against an army that size.
That's amazing.
It's fairly well documented.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think I've heard of that one. Yeah. You can just hang on to it because somebody else is going to want it in a minute. Thanks. Okay. Anybody else? anywhere else in the Bible. How about Moses? Right? I'm going to give you, he had a vision of the blueprints of the tabernacle. Build it like you saw it. Okay, so there's an example. What about Isaiah? He was in the temple, and he was worshiping. He said, I saw Yehovah, and the train of his garment filled the whole temple. Okay? What about John? In the book of Revelation, he's having a vision of heaven, right? So the book of Revelation is a little bit, it's this. I am going to reveal, meaning draw back the curtain so that while you're on earth and you know things are going on earth, this is what's going on in the heavenly realm. So, okay, let's move on. Okay, he uses the words, the angel of Yehovah uses the words, I came as a Satan to you, in Hebrew. Don't let that bother you, okay? Because Satan is not a name. The devil, Satan, is not his name, okay? It is a title that means the one that is against, the adversary. So in this situation, what Yehovah is telling Balaam is, I am here as your adversary right now, because you're moving this way and I'm holding my hand up. Okay? By the way, remember that in Jewish belief, the enemy or the adversary is known as Ha-Satan, which means the adversary. When you have a word in Hebrew that begins with Ha, it's the. Okay? And it's never capitalized. David. Sure. When you hand him the mic. Thanks.
Thanks, Steve. So, being that Hebrew is very often multi-layered, could it be correct to say, if you were to translate that as best you could, I have come as an adversary and accuser?
Maybe. I don't know. Why the added word?
Well, because that's what Satan does, is he accuses. He's always accusing.
That is his
that
way.
is that is the format
Right.
of his adversaryship. Is I'm here to accuse you.
Right.
You
But that doesn't mean that that's what all adversaries use.
no, but
There's
I
different means and different methods.
well, it
So I
sounds
don't know.
it sounds to me like he may have been accusing him. You are on a reckless path, rather than just a declaration. It was he actually said, "I know what you're thinking.
Oh.
This is what you're thinking." That's why I felt it might be not just as an adversary or someone to block you. I mean,
That might work.
he was there to kill him.
Yeah, that
If
might
he
work.
if he had proceeded,
Yes.
that it would have been his death.
And what was
So-
it that he was going to do that Yehovah was what was the reason that he was his adversary?
He was going to curse God's
Yes.
and his ulterior motive was that he wanted the money that Balaam.
So he was going to curse Israel, and he was doing it as a hitman. He was for hire, right? Okay, so the angel explained to Balaam that God was trying to stop him from opposing Israel. Well, when Balaam arrived in Moab, Balak tried 3 times to get Balaam to curse Israel. But when he opened his mouth, the Spirit of God came on him, and only the words of Yehovah's blessing Israel came out. Balak was furious, but Balaam answered him, "Didn't I indeed tell your messengers whom you sent to me, saying, if Balak were to give me his house full of silver or gold, I could not go beyond the mouth of Adonai to do good or bad from my own heart. Whatever Adonai may speak, I will speak." Now, what's amazing is that this diviner, okay, who is out to get money, okay, really utters real prophetic words. I don't even know if he knew what his words meant, but he, for example, here's one of them. And you read the readings, so you've read the poems coming out of his mouth, but one of them in 24, verse 14 is this: "I see him, yet not at this moment. I behold him, yet not in this location. For a star will come from Jacob, and a scepter will arise from Israel." Okay? Those words go all the way back to Jacob's words when he was dying. Remember when he blessed his sons, basically outlining what they had done that was good and bad and what was going to happen in the later days and things like that. And his words were that the scepter, there's that word that Balaam uses, will not pass from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until the one to whom it belongs arrives. Okay, now, Messiah was that one, okay, who had the rod, or he had the staff of leadership for Israel, and he rose out of Judah, okay? And his birth was introduced by a star, and in the book of Revelation, he is known as the bright and morning star, okay? So here's Balaam, and he's opening his mouth, and these words are coming out, and they're prophecies, real ones, okay? That line in your notes that says, "Aught of the why is he deemed wicked," just cross that out. That is a leftover remnant of editing. Now I need to go fix it again. Okay, so Balaam, the prophet, the diviner, the sorcerer, who looks like he believes in the God of Israel and actually calls him by name, Yehovah, and actually calls him by Elohim. But Balaam is a pagan sorcerer, a diviner of gods and spirits of gods, among whom Yehovah is a god, and in his mind, just another deity that I might be able to manipulate. Have you ever done that? Tried to manipulate God to do what you want?
When haven't I?
When haven't you? All right. Beware, all right, of all manipulation of God, of others, of your wife, of your husband, of your neighbor, of anybody. It's dangerous. Okay? Really, manipulation is at the foundation of what is witchcraft. Okay? So, it might be good to ask, Yehovah, do I do anything that manipulates? And if I do, get that out of me, because I don't want to do that anymore. Husbands manipulate wives. Wives manipulate husbands. It happens regularly. So we have to learn how not to do that. Now, what's interesting is Balaam's name, Balaam, okay, is a combination of words. One is the word Baal, Beit Lamed, which means not. Okay, it's a negator. And the word which means people. So his name literally means not of the people. So he's not of the people of Israel. We know that. And in the ancient pictograph language, his name would mean the house that leads to experience chaos. Okay? Now, one of the other ways that we know that Balaam was not the good guy that some people think he is Jewish history and literature, where Balaam is described as a wicked man. He's even seen as wicked in the Messianic writings. And I would argue, we're going to read the verse in 2 Peter and in Revelation, and I would argue that both of those books are Jewish history. Okay? 2 Peter is not a Christian book. It's a Jewish letter. Right? Written by a believing Jew, Peter. Okay? And here's what Peter writes about people who are wicked. They have abandoned the straight way. They have gone astray. They have followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of wickedness. But he received a rebuke for his wrongdoing. A dumb donkey spoke with a man's voice and put a stop to the prophet's madness. Now, he should have added the word at least for the moment, because Balaam's going to go ahead and do something really bad. Okay? In the book of Revelation, Yeshua is speaking to the community of believers in Pergamum, and he says this to them, "But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who was teaching Balak to put a stumbling block before B'nai Israel. To do what? To eat food sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality." Okay, so, according to Revelation, Yeshua's words are that this Balaam guy, number one, loved the wages of wickedness. It literally means the money. He loved the idea that he was going to get rich from being this bad guy prophet who was going to do Balak's bidding, okay? Secondly, he is accused, if you want to use that word, of teaching Balak to put a stumbling block in front of Israel. And what was that stumbling block? Eating food that had been sacrificed to idols and committing sexual immorality. So there they are. Okay? Now, it's interesting, and it might be argued, yeah, but Balaam spoke the words of God. And a good answer to that is yes, as did the donkey. Anyone can open their mouth and speak the words of God. Okay? Even though Balaam spoke true words and blessed Israel with his words, Balaam is an example of what not to do. Okay? So you might ask, when did he put this stumbling block before Israel to eat what had been sacrificed to idols and commit sexual immorality? When did he do that? Well, we have to read on in the Torah portion and look at what happened after Balaam spoke all of these glowing words and blessing Israel. Okay, we read in Numbers 25, verse 1. While Israel was staying in Shittim, the people began to have immoral sexual relations with the women of Moab. There you have it. Then they invited the people to sacrifice to their gods, so the people were eating and bowing down before their gods, meaning the gods of the Moabites. Okay, so later in the book of Numbers, we learn that Balaam gave the Moabites the idea of how to get at Israel. What was his idea? Send in the women. Okay, that doesn't have anything to do with you women, all right? It had to do with the women that were going to be used on behalf of Moab to go into this enemy and seduce their men. And you know what? It worked. And a lot of the men began turning to these women, and, just like happens over and over and over again, when the woman is used the wrong way, all right, it can be devastating for the man. Where do we learn about that? In the garden, right? The woman was designed to be the man's helper, but in the garden, the woman became the man's enemy, and it wasn't that the woman was sitting thinking, yeah, serpent, you're right. I can get at that guy, and I can, I don't like him anyway. No, that's not going on at all. What's going on in the garden is the woman has believed a lie, that if she eats of this fruit, it will help her in her job of helping her husband. Okay? It will make her more wise, right? It'll make her more knowledgeable. So she eats it and she gives it to her husband, and her husband listens to her voice. And in that circumstance, it didn't work very well. That doesn't mean that men don't need to listen to their wives. That's not where I'm going with this. But husbands and wives all need to know the voice of Yehovah, okay? Because if you don't, then you don't have any way to correct. You know what I mean? Who else did this? Who else was guilty of foreign women that led him in a bad direction? Sarah and Abraham was an example of Abraham listening to his wife when his wife had not been listening to Yehovah, yeah? Samson. Who else? Solomon. Shlomo. Okay? And there's more. Look at the book of Judges. Okay? So, it happens over and over again. Okay? Later in Numbers, what you read is why they are the ones, because of Balaam's advice, that caused B'nai Israel to be unfaithful to Adonai in the matter of Peor, so that the plague was on the community of Adonai. And we're going to read about that in just a minute. So the result of taking Balaam's advice was bad. It was devastating. But in the middle of all this going on, and the men of Israel shacking up with the women of Moab, there's a hero that arises whose name is Phinehas. Okay? So we read, when Israel became bound to Baal of Peor, that's the god, Baal, the anger of Adonai grew hot against Israel. Adonai said to Moses, seize all the ringleaders and hand them before Adonai. Hang them before Adonai facing the sun, so that Adonai's fierce anger may be turned away from Israel. In other words, take those rascals and hang them in a way that you're not looking at their faces, and neither am I. Okay, but you're going to hang them anyway. So Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of you kill your men who have been joining themselves to Baal of Peor. Whoa. Then behold, a man from Bani Israel came and brought a Midianite woman to his brothers before the eyes of Moses and of the whole assembly of Bani Israel, while they were weeping at the entrance to the tent of meeting. So Moses and the leaders are there, and they're weeping because of what's going on. And this guy just parades right by them with this woman. I don't know, does he have her by the hair? Is he dragging her? I doubt it. But he has this woman, she's on his arm maybe, as they walk right by. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the Cohen, saw it, he arose from the midst of the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and went after the man of Israel into the tent and pierced them through, both the Israelite man and the woman's belly. Then the plague among Bani Israel was stopped. However, 24,000 were dead because of the plague. Okay, so this Baal of Peor, Baal is from a root word that means marry or rule over. Okay, so the idea of worshiping this god Baal was the idea that you're going to marry him. Well, how can you do that if you're already married to Yehovah? What does that mean you're doing? Committing adultery, which Israel did over and over and over again. Peor was a mountain in Moab that gave its name to the Baal who was worshipped there and to whom Israel was attracted. The god is also known as Peor, not just Baal. And this form of Baal worship was a form of worship that used sexual indulgences. Okay? So here's the deal. Knowing who Yehovah is, being able to hear his voice and see things in the spiritual realm, being able to prophesy and speak his word does not mean a person belongs to God. Beware of what? False prophets. Okay? So all of those things an individual might be able to do and not belong to Yehovah. That's kind of freaky, isn't it? Think about how we usually judge whether or not someone is a man of God or a woman of God. How do we usually judge that? Well, we judge them by their words. If they're usually speaking words that we like or we agree with, then wow, that's a real man of God. Okay? Somebody who speaks words about you that might be true. Well, that's a real man of God, isn't it? No. That's not what determines whether someone is a man of God or a woman of God. Okay? What does? The fruit of what? Obedience. Walking in his ways. That's the only proof that you have. Does that individual walk in the ways of Yehovah, or does that individual walk in the ways of the world? Simple. Okay? And you can hear from God. So just be aware of that. Okay. In Deuteronomy, we're even warned by Yehovah and Moses in Deuteronomy that if there is a prophet or a dreamer of dreams that rises up among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or the wonder that he spoke to you comes true, while saying, let's follow other gods that you have not known, and let's serve them, you must not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For Adonai your God is testing you to find out whether you love Adonai your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Adonai your God will follow you. Adonai your God you will follow, and him will you fear. His mitzvot you will keep, and to his voice you will listen. Him you must serve, and to him you will cling, and that prophet or dreamer of dreams must be put to death. In Jeremiah's days, there were a lot of prophets, okay, that were not even giving the right words, all right? And this is what Yehovah said through Jeremiah. Do not listen to the words of prophets who are prophesying to you. They are leading you into illusion, speaking a vision of their own heart and not out of the mouth of Adonai. And then Ezekiel has words that are almost like that. Son of man, prophesy concerning the prophets of Israel who are prophesying. Say to those who prophesy out of their own heart, hear the word of Adonai. Thus has Adonai Elohim, woe to the foolish prophets who follow their own spirit, except they have seen nothing. Same thing that Yeshua says in Matthew, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruit, just like you guys were bringing up. So that means that someone who is a true prophet of Yehovah must, number one, follow, love, and worship only the one true God. Right? Yehovah. And must follow only Yehovah's word, his Torah, and obey him by keeping his commands. And 3, produce godly fruit, which is behavior that lines up with God's words. It's not complicated. Okay? So, what happened to Balaam? We learned about that in the book of Joshua. It says in Joshua 13, Balaam, son of Beor, the diviner, whom Bani Yisrael killed with the sword, among the rest of their slain. So when Moses looked at the children of Israel, the Levites, said, draw your sword against any of these who are doing this adultery with these Moabite women, Balaam was one of the ones that got killed. So, well, that took about an hour. Now, does anybody have any questions or comments or ideas about what you have read tonight? Okay, I'm going to get the mic back. We have some onliners who have some ideas.
We see your hand raised.
Who's up? Okay, Don. Hey, you're on.
So I have a question. As amazing as what happened with Balaam is, there's another one that's more amazing and mysterious. It's in 1 Samuel 28:7. How in the world did that witch summon up Samuel to do what he did, and it came true? Or was it a familiar spirit? But that was even more amazing.
Yep. And there's, more than one idea about that. One idea is that it wasn't really Samuel that he raised, but it was a demon. Okay, that was just there. That is one idea. I imagine there are other ideas about that, and you're right. It is amazing, and realize that evil people that have evil powers are real. You know, that's something we don't think about very often, but they really do have an ability to do some things that Yehovah doesn't like, right?
In the complete Jewish Bible, it says it was Samuel, and that Saul recognized him, and Samuel told him, "Why did you bring me up?" And he told him he was going to die, but that doesn't mean it was not a familiar spirit. It just says
It reads as though it really is the guy that he brought up. Yes. But what's amazing is when he brought him up, he was like, "What are you doing? Leave me alone. You're not allowed to do this. You're not supposed to be doing this." So it makes me wonder, well, what was he doing? What was Samuel doing? You know, maybe it's a little bit like me and my alarm in the morning. Sometimes that thing goes off and I'm like, "What are you doing? Stop it." It doesn't. All right, okay, I'm going to take the mic back over to Dave.
I just had a comment. One of the things I thought very interesting about that Samuel
Wait,
story.
Can you hear Dave? Say.
One of the things I thought that was very interesting about the Samuel story, that the woman who was the sorcerer or whatever was scared. Mm-hmm. When Samuel or whatever came up, she was actually afraid.
Yeah.
Because maybe she never expected Samuel to come up. Maybe she just expected her.
Maybe she was like, "Whoa."
And
wow.
she was really afraid of what actually happened.
Yep. Okay, who else? Okay, hold on. Mike. Eric's, you have something? Jim, you have a question?
Yes. Yeah. First off, there hasn't been any mention about what was the plague that killed 24,000.
Yeah.
Anybody know?
Does anybody know? It isn't mentioned. I don't know.
Okay. All right. And then, having been raised in the free church, I believe that I was taught that a prophet of God, the criteria is that his or her prophecies were true, where they wouldn't have any false prophecies. And I'm looking at what's listed here, and I don't see in those three criterias that they have to prophesy correctly.
Well, if you read the Deuteronomy in Torah, the Deuteronomy warning says even if their word is correct, don't listen to them if this, and this. So that's where I'm getting at. Where I'm getting at is you can have someone who's not following Yehovah, but their word is correct. Sure. You can have that happen. So that's one of the things about Balaam that kind of hit me. Okay, Esther.
Doesn't take it. So I had the same question actually about the plague, but so my question was, when did he turn the blessing into a curse? When because they started warring and eating the meat to sacrifice animals. So when did Balaam turn that blessing into a curse? When did that happen?
Well, he didn't really do that in a way that was like verbal, like, all right, now I'm going to curse Israel. The idea is what he did is he got Balak and the leaders, and he got them together, and he said, listen, if you really want to get Israel, here's what you do. Send your women in. Have them entice the Israelite men to follow them and begin to worship their gods, and then you won't have to worry about them anymore. Okay, so it was advice that he gave.
Yeah. Okay. So and do you know why he let them build 7 altars and 7 bulls and 7 rams 3 times?
Why? Who led him?
Oh, you know that Balaam said to Balak, build me 7 altars and give me 7 bulls and 7 rams and sacrifice them. And he did that 3 times.
Right. So I don't know what it is that you want to know.
Oh, why 7?
Mark, do you know that one? I don't know, other than it's God's number, and we're going to use God's number here, and we're going to use anything that we can use to get what we want. All right? It's a little bit like, I'm thinking of some story, and it's one of these things that is like in every generation they have these legends of these people that find a book, okay, and they're going to use the book in order to conjure up, something in order to get what they want. Okay.
Right, because he did it so he could hear the word of Adonai. Right, so he said, because maybe if I do this, the 7, build me 7 altars and 7 cows, so maybe Adonai will speak to me. So maybe it meant he read Torah and saw the sacrifices, and that's why he did that, maybe? I don't know. I don't know either.
Yep. It's a good number. Anybody else? Mm-hmm. All right, well, you get to go home early tonight. It's July. Go get Reds, whatever it is that you need to be do. May you be blessed in the name of Yehovah, who walk in his ways and be his light on the earth. Amen.
Thank you. Good night.
You're welcome. Good night, everybody. Enjoyed having you here or there. Okay, got this.